When I told my husband I was pregnant, he emptied our accounts and disappeared without a trace. But the trust fund I'd kept secret my entire marriage had different plans for our future. 10 years later, when Lionel stood at my office door begging for a second chance, he had no idea he was asking the CEO of the company that had just bought his failing business. The day still plays in my mind like a film I can't stop watching. February 14th. Yes, Valentine's Day, when everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty shattered into 1,000 irretrievable pieces. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Remember the excitement bubbling in my chest as I prepared dinner in our modest apartment. Lionel and I had been trying for a baby for nearly 2 years. After months of disappointment, the 2 pink lines had finally appeared on the test that morning. I'd wrapped the test in a small blue box with a note that read, "The greatest adventure begins now." The table was set with our wedding china, rarely used but perfect for this occasion. Candles flickered, casting warm shadows across the walls. I'd prepared Lionel's favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon, roasted asparagus, and the chocolate soufflé he always raved about whenever we splurged on anniversary dinners at Bellini's downtown. 6:43 p.m., I heard his key in the door. I smoothed my dress, a new purchase that morning, ruby red and slightly fitted to show off the tiny life inside me that only I knew existed. His footsteps sounded different, heavier perhaps, as he crossed our living room. "Sherry!" His voice carried none of the warmth I expected. When he appeared in the doorway to our dining room, his face was a mask I didn't recognize. Distant, cold. Something fluttered in my stomach. Not the baby, but intuition. Something was terribly wrong. "Happy Valentine's Day," I said, my voice faltering slightly. "I made your favorite." Lionel didn't move closer. His suit, normally impeccable, looked rumpled. His tie was loosened, and the shadow of stubble darkened his jaw. His eyes, the warm brown eyes I'd fallen in love with 7 years earlier at Kennedy's gallery opening, were now hard, almost black in the candlelight. "We need to talk," he said, setting his briefcase on the floor with deliberate care. I gestured. To the table, the candles, the bottle of sparkling cider chilling in the ice bucket. "Let's talk over dinner. Everything's ready." He shook his head once, a sharp, decisive motion. "I've accepted a position with Montgomery International, in Dubai." The words hung in the air between us, disconnected from meaning at first. "Dubai? But when did you interview? You never mentioned, because I knew you'd try to talk me out of it." He remained standing, creating a wall between us with his rigid posture. "I've been unhappy for a long time, Sherry. This marriage isn't working." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. "What are you talking about? We were just discussing starting a family last week. We've been trying for—" "I was telling you what you wanted to hear." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I've been seeing someone. Haley. She's the VP of marketing at Montgomery. She understands my ambitions in a way you never have." Each word landed like physical blows. I reached for the back of a dining chair to steady myself, knocking over a wine glass in the process. The crystal shattered against the hardwood floor, water spreading like a premonition. "How long?" I managed to ask. 6 months? No hesitation. No shame. The blue box with the pregnancy test felt impossibly heavy in my dress pocket. "I don't understand. We've been happy. We've been planning our future. We've been struggling on a middle manager's salary while you insist on working at that nonprofit for nothing," he said, a hint of the frustration he'd apparently been hiding finally breaking through. "You could have used your family connections at any point to advance my career, but you insisted on making it on our own merit. Merit doesn't pay for the lifestyle I deserve. My parents had been wealthy, yes, but I'd never touched my trust fund. We'd agreed to live modestly, to build something genuine together, or at least I thought we had agreed." Lionel, please. We need to talk about this. I have something to tell you. There's nothing to discuss. I've accepted the position. I leave tomorrow night. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. Divorce papers. My lawyer drew them up last week. The envelope dropped onto the table between us, landing beside the unlit candle that was meant to celebrate new life. I stared at it, unable to comprehend how the evening had veered so catastrophically from my imagined path. Tomorrow? But what? About our apartment, our things. Keep it all, he said with a dismissive wave. None of it was worth what I gave up to live this small life with you. In that moment, as the candle flames wavered in the draft from his movements, I made a decision. The secret I'd kept, the trust fund that would have given us financial freedom at any point in our marriage, would remain mine alone. The baby, growing inside me, would never know a father who could walk away so easily. You should know, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm pregnant. Something flickered across his face then. Doubt, perhaps, or regret. For one breathless moment, I thought he might cross the room, take me in his arms, apologize for this momentary insanity. Instead, his expression hardened further. Is it even mine? We've been trying for so long and suddenly you're pregnant when I'm leaving? The accusation stole my breath. How dare you? Of course it's yours. He picked up his briefcase. Convenient timing. I'm sure you'll use this to try. To take me for everything I have. But there's nothing left to take, Sherry. I transferred my portion of our savings this morning. You'll find the accounts empty. You did what? The room spun around me as the implications set in. Our mortgage payment was due next week. I'd just paid our credit card bills yesterday. Lionel, that's our entire safety net. You can't just... I've paid for everything long enough. He stepped backward toward the door. Haley's family has connections I can actually use. Real connections, not ones you're too principled to leverage. As he turned to leave, I found my voice one last time. Lionel, wait. He paused at the, threshold, not quite looking back. I never wanted children anyway. Consider this a clean break. The door closed behind him with quiet finality. No slam, no dramatic exit. Just the soft click of our life together ending. I stood frozen in the flickering candlelight, one hand pressed against my still flat stomach, the other clutching the back of the dining chair so tightly my knuckles whitened. The salmon grew cold. The soufflé collapsed. The candles burned down to stubs as night deepened around me. The blue box remained in my pocket, the celebration it promised now a mockery of my shattered plans. What Lionel didn't know, what I had never told him, was that I wasn't just Sherry Harrington, dedicated nonprofit worker with wealthy parents. I was Sherry Morgan Harrington, sole heir to the Morgan Financial Group, with a trust fund that had matured on my 30th birthday 6 months earlier. A trust fund I had kept secret because I wanted our family, our future children, to understand the value of hard work and honest living. As dawn broke over the city skyline visible from our apartment windows, I made myself a promise. Lionel would never know what he had walked away from. Not just me, not just his child, but a fortune that could have fulfilled every ambition he'd ever harbored. And one day, when our paths inevitably crossed again, I would be unrecognizable, not as the woman he'd left behind, but as the power he never knew I possessed. I met Lionel Reed at the opening night of Kennedy's photography exhibition 7 years before that fateful Valentine's Day. Kennedy had been my roommate in college, the free-spirited artist to my practical business major. She'd captured stunning portraits of homeless veterans for a series entitled Invisible Heroes, and her raw, unflinching images had garnered attention from several prestigious galleries. That night, I wore a simple black dress and sensible heels. My brown hair pulled back in its usual conservative style. The gallery buzzed with the energy of Manhattan's art elite, people who viewed the $50 entrance fee as pocket change rather than my week's grocery budget. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Despite my family's wealth, I lived on my nonprofit salary, the Morgan Harrington name, carefully omitted from my everyday introduction as Sherry Harrington. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," a voice said beside me as I studied a particularly haunting photograph of an elderly veteran, his weathered face reflecting decades of unseen battles. I turned to find a tall man with warm brown eyes and an easy smile, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He offered one to me. "Actually," I replied, taking the glass, "I'm exactly where I want to be. My friend took these photographs." "Kennedy Alvarez? You know her?" His interest seemed genuine, not the manufactured enthusiasm I often encountered when people thought connections might benefit them. Since college, I was the one who convinced her not to drop out her sophomore year. Lionel's laugh was rich and unrestrained. "Then the art world owes you a debt of gratitude." He extended his hand. "Lionel Reed, financial analyst by day, amateur photography enthusiast by night. Sherry Harrington, nonprofit administrator by day and night." His eyebrows raised. "Sounds demanding." Worthwhile things usually are. We spent the rest of the evening circling the gallery together, his observations about the technical aspects of Kennedy's photography complementing my stories about the subjects themselves. Veterans I'd met through my work at the Veterans Support Initiative. Later, Kennedy cornered me by the restrooms. "Who's the hottie in the charcoal suit?" she demanded, her eyes dancing with mischief. "Lionel Reed, financial analyst, amateur photographer." "Amateur my ass. That's Lionel Reed from Financial Quarterly's 30 Under 30 last year. He's being groomed for executive leadership at Rivera Banking." She nudged me playfully. "And he hasn't taken his eyes off you all night." I brushed off her excitement. "We're just talking about photography." "Sure, and I'm just taking snapshots for my scrapbook." She squeezed my arm. "He's the first guy I've seen make you smile, really smile, since Peter. Peter, my ex-fiancé who'd disappeared after discovering the truth about my family. We'd been planning our wedding when he accidentally found documentation about my trust fund. "I can't compete with that kind of money," he'd said, returning my ring. "I'll always feel like less than you deserve." That night, Lionel asked for my number as he helped me into a taxi. "I know a cafe near Central Park that serves the best almond croissants in the city, perfect for Sunday mornings." 3 days later, we were sharing those croissants on a park bench, feeding crumbs to overeager pigeons and talking for hours. Lionel spoke passionately about his 5-year career plan, his ambitions to revolutionize investment banking for middle-class families, his desire to earn everything through merit rather than connections. "My father works in a steel mill in Pittsburgh," he told me. "Worked 60 hours a week to put me through college. Everything I have, I've earned on my own terms." His words resonated with the principles my grandfather had instilled in me. William. Morgan had built Morgan Financial from nothing, insisting that wealth without purpose was meaningless. He had structured my trust fund to mature when I turned 30, believing that by then I would have developed the character to use it wisely. By our 3rd date, I made a decision. Lionel wouldn't know about my family's wealth. Not yet. I had been raised on stories of fortune hunters and social climbers who had pursued various Morgan Harringtons throughout the generations. I wanted Lionel to love me for myself, not my inheritance. We married 11 months later in a modest ceremony. Kennedy was my maid of honor, wearing a sunflower yellow dress she claimed was making a statement against matrimonial fashion tyranny. Lionel's best man was Alex, his childhood friend who managed a successful restaurant chain. We bought a small apartment, splitting the cost evenly from our separate savings. Lionel took pride in our financially independent lifestyle, often commenting on colleagues who leveraged family connections for advancement. "That's what I love about us," he would say, pulling me close on our secondhand sofa. We're building something real, something earned. For 5 years, we lived modestly but happily. Lionel received regular promotions at Rivera Banking. I dedicated myself to expanding veterans programs at the nonprofit. We traveled using carefully saved vacation funds, started a small investment portfolio, and began trying for a baby after celebrating our 5th anniversary. "I want 3, Lionel said one night as we lay in bed, his hand resting on my stomach. "A girl first, then 2 boys. "You can't exactly place an order," I laughed. "Watch me," he whispered, kissing me. I always get what I set my mind to. When I turned 30, the trust fund matured as scheduled. I received a call from Doug Winters, my family's financial advisor. $47 million, he said. "Your grandfather's investments performed better than projected. What would you like to do with it?" "Nothing," I replied. "Not yet. Keep it where it is." "Sherry," Doug's voice held concern, "this is a significant sum. Your husband should—" "Lionel doesn't know," I interrupted. "And I'm not ready to tell him." There was a long pause before Doug spoke again. "That's unusual. May I ask why?" I thought about Lionel's pride in our self-made life, his contempt for those who relied on family money. "We've built our life on equal footing. This would change everything." "It's your decision," Doug said finally. "But secrets between spouses rarely end well." I should have heeded his warning. Instead, I continued our life as if nothing had changed, planning to reveal the truth when the time felt right. Perhaps when we were expecting our first child, as a way to secure our family's future while maintaining the values we'd built together. I never imagined that by the time I was pregnant, Lionel would already have one foot out the door, lured away by ambition, and another woman's promises of the connections and lifestyle he claimed to disdain. The morning after Lionel left, I awoke. On the sofa, still in my ruby red dress, the fabric creased and spotted with dried tears. For a moment, in the hazy space between sleep and consciousness, I thought perhaps it had all been a nightmare. But the divorce papers on the dining table confirmed the cruel reality. With robotic movements, I checked our joint accounts on my phone. Lionel hadn't exaggerated. Our savings account displayed a balance of 42.17s. The checking account contained only 127.36, not enough to cover next week's mortgage payment of $2,200. My personal account, which held my modest nonprofit salary, had $964.32, barely enough, for groceries and utilities for the month. My stomach lurched, not from morning sickness, but from the sickening realization of how methodically Lionel had planned his exit. I raced to the bathroom, emptying what little remained in my stomach from the untouched dinner. Kneeling on the cold tile floor, my hand instinctively went to my abdomen. "It's okay," I whispered, unsure if I was reassuring my unborn child or myself. "We're going to be okay." My phone rang, the sound shrill in the quiet apartment. Kennedy's name flashed on the screen. I had forgotten we had plans to meet for breakfast. "Where are you?" she asked when I answered. "I've been sitting at Milo's for 20 minutes. "He's gone," I said, my voice cracking on the words. "Who's gone?" "Sherry, what's happening?" "Lionel. He left last night." 30 minutes later, Kennedy was at my door, her wild curls escaping from a hastily tied bandana, her eyes wide with concern. She took in the scene, the untouched dinner, the shattered wine glass no one had cleaned up, the divorce papers. "What the hell happened?" she demanded, setting down a bag of croissants from the cafe. I told her everything, the job in Dubai, the affair with Haley, the emptied accounts, his accusation about the paternity, his final words about never wanting children. That spineless, pathetic excuse for a man? Kennedy paced the living room, her hands gesticulating wildly as she unleashed a stream of colorful expletives that would have made a sailor blush. I knew something was off when he missed my exhibition last month. He claimed he was working late, but Alex said he saw Lionel at the Peninsula Hotel with some redhead. The revelation hit me like another blow. You knew he was cheating? Kennedy's face fell. No, God, no. Alex mentioned it casually, and I assumed it was a business dinner. I never thought... She sat beside me, taking my hands in hers. I should have said something. I'm so sorry. I shook my head. It wouldn't have changed anything. He was already planning to leave. What are you going to do about the baby? My hand went to my stomach automatically. I'm keeping it. This child is the only good thing to come from our marriage. Of course. Kennedy squeezed my hands. I meant about money, the apartment, child support. He can't just walk away from his responsibilities. I hesitated. This was the moment to tell someone about the trust fund, the secret I'd kept from everyone except Doug Winters. But something held me back. Perhaps pride, or the lingering shock, or simply the habit of privacy ingrained by my grandfather's teachings about wealth and responsibility. I'll figure it out, I said instead. The nonprofit has decent health insurance. I have some savings besides what he took. Kennedy's skeptical expression told me she wasn't convinced. You need a lawyer, Sherry. A good one. I know someone. Micah. Sanders. She handled my cousin's divorce. Took her ex for everything after he pulled something similar. The thought of a legal battle exhausted me. I can't afford a top divorce attorney right now. She'll work with you on payment. Let me call her. While Kennedy made the call from the kitchen, I forced myself to shower and change. As the hot water washed away the dried tears and the lingering scent of Lionel's cologne from my skin, reality began to solidify around me. I was 30 years old, pregnant, abandoned, and suddenly facing financial insecurity. Or so it appeared. After Kennedy left, promising to return with groceries and Micah's contact information, I closed all the blinds, unplugged the landline, and sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor with my personal laptop. With trembling fingers, I typed in the secure URL for Morgan Financial Group's private client portal. The login screen appeared, requesting credentials I had never used. Taking a deep breath, I entered the information Doug had provided when the trust matured. The screen changed, displaying the Morgan Harrington Trust portfolio. The number at the bottom of the screen seemed surreal. 47,326, 841-9. More than enough to keep this apartment. More than enough to raise a child. More than enough to rebuild a life Lionel had tried to destroy. I closed the laptop, a strange calm settling over me. The irony wasn't lost on me. All those years of living modestly, of proving we could succeed on our own merits, and now I was left with no choice but to embrace the very privilege I had chosen to set aside. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it to find a photograph of Lionel and a tall redhead, presumably Haley, boarding what appeared to be a private jet. The message read, "Thought you should see what an upgrade looks like. Sorry you couldn't measure up. H, the casual." Cruelty stole my breath. Not from Lionel. I was beginning to understand the depths of his betrayal, but from this woman who didn't even know me, who had participated in destroying my marriage and now felt entitled to twist the knife. I didn't respond, but I saved the photo. Evidence, I told myself, though of what I wasn't yet sure. That evening, I met with Micah Sanders in her downtown office. Her sharp features and precisely cut silver hair conveyed competence and determination before she spoke a single word. "Kennedy, explain the situation," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "I've seen this before. Spouses who drain accounts before filing for divorce. It's not just unethical, it's often illegal." I nodded, clutching my handbag where I kept the divorce papers. "He left yesterday. For Dubai." Micah's eyebrows rose. "International complications. Not ideal, but not insurmountable." She leaned forward. "Mrs. Reed, Harrington," I corrected automatically. I kept my name. "Ms. Harrington," she amended with an approving nod. I need to understand your financial situation to best advise you. Kennedy mentioned you work for a nonprofit? This was the moment of decision. I could continue the charade of financial vulnerability, or I could reveal the truth and use every resource at my disposal. The memory of Haley's text, that smug photo of them boarding the private jet, made the decision for me. There's something you should know, I said, straightening my spine. My full name is Sherry Morgan Harrington, of the Morgan Financial Group. Recognition flickered in Micah's eyes. William Morgan's granddaughter? Yes. I have a trust fund that matured 6 months ago. Approximately $47 million. Micah set down her pen. And your husband didn't know? No. I kept it secret throughout our marriage. I wanted us to build our life based on our own efforts, not my family's money. A slow smile spread across Micah's face. Not warm, but calculating. Ms. Morgan Harrington, your husband has made a catastrophic error in judgment. He abandoned a pregnant woman he believed was financially vulnerable, emptied your accounts, and fled the country. The courts will not look kindly on this. I don't want revenge, I said, surprising myself with how true the words felt. I just want to protect my child and move forward. Sometimes, Micah replied, her voice steely. Protection requires offensive strategies. Your husband sought to leave you with nothing. We're going to make sure he understands exactly what he walked away from, and what he'll never have access to again. As I left Micah's office, the enormity of the situation washed over me. In 24 hours, my entire life had been upended. My marriage was over. My financial security, which had always existed, but which I had chosen not to rely on, was now my primary resource. And growing inside me was a child who would never know its father. Or so I thought. Little did I know that 10 years later, Lionel would reappear, desperate and humbled, seeking a place in our lives, a place I had long since filled with something far more powerful than his absence could ever have been. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of nausea, paperwork, and sleepless nights. Morning sickness hit with a vengeance, as if my body was physically rejecting the stress of Lionel's abandonment. I found myself kneeling on the bathroom floor multiple times a day, my forehead pressed against the cool porcelain of the toilet, wondering how I could possibly build a new life when I could barely keep down crackers and ginger ale. Kennedy practically moved in, sleeping on my sofa and forcing me to eat small, bland meals throughout the day. The baby needs nutrients, she'd insist, watching me push food around my plate. Even if that spineless jerk doesn't deserve to have his DNA continue. Micah Sanders proved worth every penny of her exorbitant retainer. Within days, she had filed emergency motions to freeze any of Lionel's remaining U.S. assets and initiated proceedings for spousal support and child maintenance. The fact that he had fled to Dubai complicated matters, but didn't deter her. The UAE has no reciprocal agreement with the U.S. regarding family court judgments, she explained during our second meeting. But Montgomery International maintains significant operations in New York. We'll go after his compensation through their U.S. entity. While Micah handled the legal front, I faced another crisis, my professional life. The Veterans Support Initiative had been my passion for nearly 7 years. The thought of continuing my work there, providing housing assistance and mental health resources to veterans, had been the one constant I could cling to. But as my pregnancy progressed, I knew decisions would need to be made. On a particularly difficult morning, when even water seemed to trigger my nausea, my director Elaine called. Sherry, I'm concerned. You've missed 3 days this week. Is everything all right? I hadn't told anyone at work about the pregnancy or Lionel's departure. The words caught in my throat. I'm going through some personal issues, I managed to say. If you need time, just let me know. But the Patterson grant proposal is due next Friday. We're counting on your data analysis. The Patterson Foundation grant, $3.2 million for expanded psychological services for female veterans. I'd been working on it for months. The deadline couldn't have come at a worse time. I'll get it done, I promised, though I had no idea how. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my reflection in the dresser mirror. The woman looking back at me appeared hollow-eyed and diminished. This was not the mother I wanted to be. This was not the woman I had been raised to become. My grandfather's voice seemed to echo in my memory. Wealth is just a tool, Sherry. It's what you build with it that matters. With sudden clarity, I knew what I needed to do. I called Doug Winters. I need to access the trust, I said when he answered. Of course, he replied without hesitation. How much do you need transferred? To your personal account? None. I need you to set up a meeting with the board of Morgan Financial Group. Tomorrow, if possible. There was a pause. Sherry, you've never shown interest in the company operations before. Things have changed, Doug. I'm pregnant. My husband has abandoned me, and I've decided it's time to claim my birthright. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, Doug spoke, his voice carrying a note of respect I'd never heard before. I'll arrange it for tomorrow at 10 a.m. The next morning, I stood before the bathroom mirror, carefully applying concealer to hide the shadows under my eyes. I selected a charcoal gray suit, conservative, expensive but not flashy, projecting exactly the image I needed. For the first time since Lionel left, I pulled my hair back in a sleek chignon rather than the messy ponytail I'd been defaulting to. Kennedy watched from the doorway, arms crossed. You look like you're going to war. In a way, I am. I applied a final coat of matte red lipstick, armor of a different sort. The Morgan Financial Group occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. I had visited only a handful of times growing up, usually for obligatory holiday parties where I was paraded out as little Sherry Williams' granddaughter before being whisked away by nannies. The security guard at the desk recognized my name immediately, his eyes widening slightly. Ms. Morgan Harrington, we've been expecting you. The executive elevator whisked me directly to the 50th floor. Doug was waiting when the doors opened, his normally impassive face showing a hint of approval at my appearance. The board is assembled in the main conference room. Your grandfather's portrait was recently hung there. Good, I said, straightening my shoulders. I could use his presence today. 7 men and 2 women sat around a massive oak table, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. At the head of the table was an empty chair, my grandfather's seat, never filled since his death 5 years earlier. Ms. Morgan Harrington, began Marcus Townsend, the interim CEO, a man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and cold eyes. This is an unexpected pleasure. Doug mentioned you wanted to address the board. I remained standing, letting my gaze move deliberately around the table. Thank you for accommodating me on such short notice. I'll be direct. As the majority shareholder of Morgan Financial Group, I am exercising my right to take an active role in the company's governance, effective immediately. Murmurs circled the table. Marcus's smile remained fixed, though his eyes hardened. While we always welcome shareholder input, the day-to-day operations require experienced leadership. Your grandfather understood this, which is why he structured the trust as he did. My grandfather structured the trust to mature when I turned 30, which it did 6 months ago. I now control 53% of voting shares. I've spent the last decade working in nonprofit management, specifically in grant writing, program development, and financial oversight. I understand operations better than you might assume. With all due respect, interrupted Judith Blackwell, the CFO, running a global financial institution is quite different from managing a small nonprofit. I turned to face her directly. The Veteran Support Initiative has a $20 million annual budget, serves over 15,000 clients, and maintains compliance with federal, state, and private grant requirements. The principles of sound management apply regardless of scale. I paused, letting my words sink in. But I'm not here to become CEO, Ms. Blackwell. Not yet, anyway. Relief visibly swept through the room. I'm here to establish a new division. Morgan, humanitarian investments. We'll focus on socially responsible investments with emphasis on veteran support, healthcare innovation, and sustainable housing development. Marcus chuckled condescendingly. That sounds more like charity than banking. On the contrary, I replied, removing a folder from my briefcase and sliding printed copies around the table. These projections show an expected 12% annual return while maintaining our ethical investment criteria. The Holston Fund has achieved similar results with a much smaller capital base. The board members flipped through the pages, expressions, shifting from dismissive to intrigued as they absorbed the numbers. I've already secured commitments from 3 major pension funds that have been looking to diversify into socially responsible investments, but haven't found a partner with our reputation and capacity. This is quite detailed, Marcus admitted, studying the proposal. When did you prepare this? I've had the concept for years. The specifics were finalized last night. I didn't mention that I'd worked until 3 a.m., fueled by crackers, ginger tea, and pure determination. I'd like to begin implementation immediately. I'll need office space on this floor and hiring authority for a team of 12. Ms. Morgan Harrington, Marcus began, his tone shifting to one of cautious respect. While this proposal has merit, these things take time. Time is something I don't have in abundance at the moment, I interrupted, placing a hand on my still flat abdomen. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable. Several board members' eyes widened in understanding. I'm pregnant, recently abandoned by my husband, and determined to build something meaningful for my child's future. I propose we put it to a vote immediately. Doug, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, spoke up. As Ms. Morgan Harrington's proxy represents majority control, perhaps we should move directly to implementation planning rather than a formal vote. Marcus looked as though he had bitten into something sour, but nodded. Welcome to Morgan Financial Group, Ms. Morgan Harrington. We'll have HR prepare an office for you immediately. As the meeting concluded and board members filed out, some stopping to tentatively congratulate me, Doug remained behind. Your grandfather would be proud, he said quietly. I'm not sure about that, I replied, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline began to fade. But he always said crisis reveals character. I'm about to find out what kind of character I have. Doug's normally stoic expression softened. I knew William for 40 years. Trust me when I say he would be proud. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, my phone buzzed with a text from Kennedy. How did it go? I typed back a simple response. I just became a banker. And I think I'm going to be sick again. Despite the lingering nausea, as I stepped out into the bright spring sunshine, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Valentine's Day. Hope. Lionel had walked away believing he was leaving me with nothing. Instead, he had inadvertently pushed me toward claiming everything that was rightfully mine, including a future he would never be part of, or so I believed at the time. Despite my newfound determination and the beginnings of a professional transformation, the 3rd month of my pregnancy brought me to my knees, both literally and figuratively. The morning sickness had evolved into all-day sickness that left me dehydrated and weak. My doctor, concerned about my weight loss and inability to keep food down, diagnosed hyperemesis gravidarum, a severe form of pregnancy nausea that required medical intervention. I spent 3 nights in the hospital on IV fluids, trying to focus on the tiny life inside me rather than the clinical beeps of the monitors or the pitying glances from the nursing staff when they saw no husband or partner at my bedside. The baby's heartbeat is strong, Dr. Fielding assured me, reviewing my chart. But you need to take better care of yourself, Ms. Harrington. Your blood pressure is concerning. I'm trying, I whispered, my throat raw from vomiting. Things have been complicated. She sat on the edge of the hospital bed, her expression softening. Kennedy mentioned your situation. I want to be clear. Stress can impact your pregnancy. You need to find ways to manage it, for both your sakes. Kennedy had been my rock, spending nights in the uncomfortable hospital recliner despite my protests. But even she couldn't shield me from the reality that crashed down when I returned to the empty apartment. The divorce proceedings had stalled. Lionel had indeed transferred to Dubai, where he was apparently thriving at Montgomery International. Micah had secured a temporary freeze on his remaining U.S. assets, a meager investment account with barely $28,000, but serving him with papers internationally was proving challenging. We need to be strategic, Micah advised during a call to my hospital room. The UAE won't enforce U.S. family court judgments, but we can use the U.S. courts to attach his compensation from Montgomery's New York operations. However, I've discovered he's requested that his entire salary be paid through their Dubai entity. He's hiding, I said, staring at the ceiling tiles. Effectively, yes. But no one can hide forever. The Patterson Grant proposal for the Veteran Support Initiative loomed over me. I had promised Elaine I would complete it, but between the hospitalization and my new role at Morgan Financial, I hadn't made progress. My laptop sat unopened on the nightstand, a silent accusation. When I was discharged, Kennedy helped me settle, back into the apartment. Everything about the space felt wrong now. The king-sized bed Lionel and I had chosen together, the wedding photos I hadn't yet had the heart to remove, the nursery I had begun planning in my mind but now couldn't imagine, creating in this tainted space. That night, alone for the first time since the hospital, I experienced what I can only describe as my darkest moment. It began with a text message from Alex, Lionel's childhood friend and best man at our wedding. I'm sorry about everything. Lionel told me his side, but I wanted to hear yours. I stared at the message, a hollow laugh escaping my lips. His side? What possible justification could there be for emptying our accounts and abandoning his pregnant wife? I didn't respond. Instead, I found myself walking through the apartment, touching objects that held memories. The throw pillows we'd argued about at Pottery Barn, the crystal vase his parents had given us for our anniversary, the framed photo from our honeymoon in Santorini. In the kitchen, I opened a drawer and found the envelope containing our anniversary reservations for Bellini's, a surprise I had planned for next month. The receipt showed the non-refundable deposit I'd placed, another financial loss in the growing tally. Something broke inside me then. With a guttural cry I hardly recognized as my own, I swept my arm across the counter, sending dishes crashing to the floor. I yanked open cabinets, pulling out the matching plates we'd received as wedding gifts, smashing them one by one against the tile. I tore the wedding photos from the walls, the sound of shattering glass oddly satisfying. I moved through the apartment like a hurricane, destroying every physical reminder of the life I'd built with Lionel. When I reached the bedroom, I pulled his remaining clothes from the closet, the items he'd deemed not valuable enough to pack, and piled them in the bathtub. The platinum lighter he'd left behind, a gift from me on our first anniversary, provided the flame that reduced his designer shirts to ashes, the smoke detector's shrill warning eventually breaking through my rage. Exhausted and suddenly terrified. By my own behavior, I sank to the bathroom floor, the acrid smell of smoke stinging my nostrils. My hand went instinctively to my stomach. I'm sorry, I whispered to my unborn child. I'm so sorry. The gravity of my situation crashed down upon me with crushing force. I was pregnant and alone. My marriage was over. My career path had veered, dramatically from the simple, purposeful life I'd chosen. The careful control I'd maintained over my emotions since Valentine's Day had shattered as completely as the dishes now littering my kitchen floor. Was this who I was becoming? A bitter, angry woman who burned her ex-husband's clothes and destroyed Her own home in a fit of rage? What kind of mother would that make me? My phone rang. Kennedy, checking in. I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't let anyone see me like this, not even my closest friend. As dawn approached, I sat amid the destruction I'd created. My tears long since dried, a hollowness expanding inside me that seemed to echo with each breath. I had never felt so utterly alone, so completely adrift from the person I thought I was. The baby moved then, the first unmistakable flutter of life, like butterfly wings deep inside. A tangible reminder that regardless of how alone I felt, I wasn't truly alone at all. I pressed my palm against the slight swell of my abdomen, feeling that flutter again. In that moment of connection with my child, clarity emerged from the darkness. Couldn't stay here, in this apartment filled with shattered memories and broken promises. I couldn't continue pretending I could manage everything alone. The pregnancy, the new division at Morgan Financial, the remnants of my old life at the Veterans Support Initiative. I needed to make choices, difficult ones, that would shape not just my future, but my child's as well. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone and called Doug. "I need help," I said when he answered, my voice hoarse from crying. Without hesitation, he replied, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. When Doug arrived, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, he surveyed the destruction of the apartment without judgment. He simply asked, "What do you need?" "A new place to live. Somewhere Lionel has never been." "I can't raise a child here." He nodded. "I'll have options for you by noon." "What else?" "I need to resign from the Veterans Support Initiative. I can't give them what they need right now, and they deserve better. We can establish a foundation through Morgan Humanitarian Investments to support their work, if that would help ease your mind." I nodded, grateful for his practical approach. "And I need someone to help me manage the pregnancy and the new division simultaneously. I can't do everything alone anymore. I'll have HR send over candidates for an executive assistant today." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "Your grandfather often said that acknowledging when you need help is not weakness. It's the ultimate strength." I managed a weak smile. "He also said, crisis doesn't create character. It reveals it." I'm not sure what last night revealed about mine. Doug looked around at the destroyed apartment. "It revealed you're human, Sherry, and that you're ready to move forward rather than live in the past." He gestured to the pile of wedding photos with shattered frames. "This needed to happen. Now, we rebuild." As Doug made calls from the living room, I went to the bathroom and washed my face, avoiding my reflection in the mirror. I didn't need to see myself to know that something fundamental had shifted. The woman who had meticulously prepared a Valentine's dinner to announce her pregnancy was gone. In her place stood someone I didn't fully recognize yet, someone forged in betrayal and abandonment, someone who had glimpsed her own capacity for destructive rage, but also felt the first stirrings of maternal love. Who would she become? What kind of mother would she be? What would she build from the ashes of the life Lionel had destroyed? The baby fluttered again, as if responding to my questions with the only answer that mattered. We are still here. We continue. By nightfall, I had signed papers for a new penthouse apartment in a building owned by Morgan Financial Group, submitted my resignation to the Veterans Support Initiative, along with a completed Patterson grant proposal I'd somehow finished in a burst of determined focus, and interviewed 3 candidates for the position of executive assistant. The darkness hadn't fully lifted, but I had stopped falling. Sometimes, I would later realize, you have to hit bottom before you can begin the long climb back toward light. The day I moved into my new penthouse marked 6 months since Lionel had walked out of my life. My baby bump was now pronounced enough that strangers on the elevator offered me their seats, and the hyperemesis had finally subsided, replaced by an appetite that seemed insatiable. "I think you've eaten more in the past week than in the previous 5 months combined," Kennedy remarked as she helped me arrange family photos, none featuring Lionel, on the built-in shelves of my new living room. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the Morgan-owned building on Park Avenue, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. It was worlds away from the modest apartment I'd shared with Lionel, a deliberate choice to create a physical distance from my past life. Ms. Morgan Harrington, where would you like these documents filed? Sophia Lynn, my newly hired executive assistant, appeared in the doorway holding a stack of folders. At 35, Sophia was a former military intelligence officer who had transitioned to corporate life with the precision and efficiency that had characterized her military career. She had been the standout among the candidates Doug had sent over, the only one who hadn't flinched when I mentioned my pregnancy and pending divorce during the interview. The Home Office, please. And Sophia, I've told you. It's just Sherry when we're not at Morgan Financial. She nodded with a slight smile. Old habits. The movers need your signature on the final paperwork. As I signed the forms, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored wall of the entryway. The woman reflected back was not the same one who had planned a Valentine's dinner 6 months earlier. My face had filled out again after the weight loss from the hyperemesis. I'd cut my long brown hair into a sleek bob, a practical decision that somehow felt symbolic. My wardrobe had transformed from casual non-profit attire to the tailored maternity versions of power suits. But the most profound change wasn't visible. It was the steel I felt forming inside me, tempering my natural compassion with a new resolve. The trust fund that had matured just before Lionel left, the fortune I had kept secret to preserve our authentic life together, had become the foundation of something new. Morgan Humanitarian Investments approved its first major project yesterday. I told Kennedy as we broke for lunch, gourmet sandwiches Sophia had ordered from the deli downstairs. A veterans housing development in Queens with on-site mental health services. Kennedy squeezed my hand. You're taking what happened with Lionel and creating something beautiful from it. That's actual alchemy. It's survival, I corrected her. And maybe a bit of spite. Speaking of spite, Kennedy hesitated. Alex reached out to me again. He wants to talk to you. My jaw tightened. I hadn't responded to any of Alex's messages since that night in the old apartment. What does he want? He says Lionel's been telling people you had a mental breakdown, that you've been institutionalized. The sandwich turned to ash in my mouth. Institutionalized? While I'm building a multi-million-dollar investment division? Most people in your social circle don't know about your role at Morgan Financial yet. You've been keeping a low profile. By choice, I said, setting down my sandwich. Not because I'm in a psychiatric facility. Kennedy's expression was sympathetic, but determined. Maybe it's time to go public. Reclaim your narrative. That would mean acknowledging Lionel's existence, I pointed out. I've been perfectly happy pretending he never existed. Have you, though? Kennedy's gaze was too perceptive. You've thrown yourself into work. You're creating this beautiful home for your baby. But you haven't dealt with what he did. I started to protest, but the words died in my throat as I remembered the night I'd destroyed our old apartment. The rage that had overtaken me wasn't the reaction of someone who had processed their pain. What do you suggest? I asked finally. Kennedy pulled out her phone. There's a charity gala next weekend, the Metropolitan Museum's annual fundraiser. Everyone who's anyone in New York finance will be there, including Montgomery International executives, I realized. Haley might be there. Exactly. It's time to show the world, and Lionel, wherever he is, exactly who Sherry Morgan Harrington has become. Long after Kennedy left, I stood at the window of my new home, watching the city lights blink on as dusk descended. My hand rested on my growing belly, feeling the now familiar movements of my daughter. Yes, a daughter. I'd learned at my last ultrasound appointment. A little girl who would never know abandonment or betrayal from me. The thought of attending the gala, of deliberately stepping into the social spotlight I'd avoided my entire adult life, filled me with a complicated mix of dread and anticipation. It would mean embracing not just my name and fortune, but the power that came with them. Power I had always been reluctant to wield. My grandfather's voice seemed to echo in my memory. Power itself is neither good nor evil, Sherry. It's what you build with it that matters. I pulled out my phone and called Sophia. I need a dress, I said when she answered. Something appropriate for the Met Gala next weekend. Something that makes a statement. I'll arrange fittings tomorrow. She replied without missing a beat. Any particular statement in mind? I looked at my reflection again, at the woman who had emerged from the ashes of Valentine's Day betrayal. Yes, I said, a smile spreading across my face. The statement is, I've just begun. In that moment, as the city lights twinkled below like earthbound stars, I felt something shift inside me. Not my daughter's movement, but something deeper. The last remnants of the woman who had defined herself through Lionel's eyes fell away, replaced by someone new. Someone who was just beginning to understand her own power. The Metropolitan Museum Gala was a swirl of designer gowns, champagne flutes, and carefully calibrated social interactions. I stood at the entrance, one hand resting protectively over my 7-month pregnant belly, the other clutching my beaded clutch so tightly my knuckles whitened. You look stunning, Kennedy whispered beside me. Remember that. The emerald green gown Sophia had found showcased rather than concealed my pregnancy, with strategic draping that transformed my changing body into something regal rather than cumbersome. My newly bobbed hair was swept back, highlighting diamond earrings that had once belonged to my grandmother, another Morgan Harrington legacy I had previously kept tucked away. Ms. Morgan Harrington? The museum director approached, hand extended. We're honored you could attend. Your foundation's contribution to our educational programs is transformative. I smiled, accepting his handshake. Morgan Humanitarian Investments believes strongly in accessible arts education. We're pleased to support your work. This was the first of many such interactions. For years, I had avoided the social obligations that came with my family name, preferring the anonymity of my nonprofit work. Now, I was deliberately stepping into the spotlight, claiming my place in New York society not as Lionel Reed's abandoned wife, but as Sherry Morgan Harrington, philanthropist and financial power player. But beneath the polished exterior, I felt like an imposter. Each introduction, each conversation about investment strategies or philanthropic initiatives triggered an internal voice questioning my right to be there. I had spent so long defining myself in opposition to my family's wealth and influence that embracing it now felt like a betrayal of my former self. An hour into the evening, Kennedy nudged me. 3:00, red dress. That's her. I turned slightly, catching sight of a tall redhead in a form-fitting crimson gown. Haley, the woman who had sent me that cruel text message with the photo of her and Lionel boarding the private jet. The woman my husband had deemed an upgrade. She's with the Montgomery International Group, Kennedy whispered. Word is she's been promoted to Senior VP of Global Marketing. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same constriction I'd experienced when Lionel walked out. For a moment, I considered leaving, retreating to the safety of my new penthouse where I didn't have to face these physical reminders of betrayal. I think I need some air, I murmured to Kennedy, making my way toward a less crowded alcove. Leaning against a marble column, I took deep breaths, trying to calm the rapid beating of my heart. My daughter kicked vigorously, as if sensing my distress. Sherry Harrington? Is that really you? I turned to find Marcus Townsend, the interim CEO of Morgan Financial Group, regarding me with undisguised surprise. Marcus, I nodded coolly. It's Morgan Harrington, actually, as you well know. His eyes dropped to my prominent belly. I had heard rumors, of course, but he cleared his throat. Motherhood suits you, as does your new role. The quarterly projections for Morgan Humanitarian Investments are impressive. Thank you. I accepted the compliment with a slight nod, though internally I was bristling. The same board members who had initially dismissed my ideas were now scrambling to associate themselves with the division's success. I must say your grandfather would be proud. I wasn't sure at first. Your background in nonprofits seemed limiting. But you've proven me wrong. Before I could respond, a flash of red caught my eye. Haley was approaching, champagne in hand, her gaze fixed directly on me. You must be Sherry, she said, extending her hand. I'm Haley Winters. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance. The audacity stole my breath. After months of trying to process Lionel's betrayal, I was face to face with its catalyst, a woman who seemed to feel no shame whatsoever about her role in destroying my marriage. Marcus looked between us, clearly, sensing the tension. You two know each other? Not directly, I replied, ignoring Haley's outstretched hand. Ms. Winters is involved with my soon-to-be ex-husband. Haley's smile faltered slightly. Lionel speaks very highly of you. How fascinating, I responded, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Given that he told you I had been institutionalized for a mental breakdown. Her eyes widened. I don't know what you've heard, but Ms. Winters, I interrupted. I'm not interested in whatever narrative Lionel has constructed. The facts speak for themselves. He abandoned his pregnant wife, emptied our joint accounts, and fled the country. Those actions reveal his character far more clearly than any story he might tell. Marcus was watching this exchange with increasing discomfort. Sherry, perhaps we should discuss the upcoming board presentation. In a moment, Marcus. I turned back to Haley, who was now clutching her champagne flute like a shield. I actually should thank you. If Lionel hadn't left, I might never have embraced my full potential. Morgan Humanitarian Investments is projecting a 15% return this quarter while financing veterans housing, medical research, and educational initiatives. Haley's expression shifted from discomfort to confusion. Morgan Humanitarian... Wait, you're that Morgan Harrington? Lionel never mentioned... No, he wouldn't have known. I allowed myself a small smile. I kept my trust fund private during our marriage, a decision I now realize was misguided, given his apparent preoccupation with wealth and status. The color drained from Haley's face as the implications sank in. Lionel had abandoned a woman with access to one of the largest family fortunes in New York, a connection that would have given him precisely the kind of influence and opportunities he claimed to want. If you'll excuse me, I said, nodding to Marcus. I should rejoin my friend. The baby makes standing for too long uncomfortable. As I walked away, I heard Marcus explaining to Haley exactly who I was in the financial world. Not just William Morgan's granddaughter, but the innovative force behind Morgan Financial's fastest-growing division. Kennedy intercepted me halfway across the room. You're white as a sheet. What happened? I just met Haley, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. And I realized something important. What's that? I looked around the glittering room, at the power brokers and influencers who now greeted me with newfound respect. I've been afraid of becoming someone I'm not by embracing my family legacy. But the truth is, I've been denying who I really am all along. The trust fund, the Morgan Harrington name, they're not just resources, they're responsibilities. My daughter kicked again, a sharp reminder of the future I was building. And I'm done apologizing for having the power to make a difference. 2 weeks after the Met Gala, the Wall Street Journal published a feature on Morgan Humanitarian Investments, highlighting our innovative approach to socially responsible finance. The article, which included a professional photograph of me in my office, visibly pregnant but radiating confidence, sent ripples through the financial world. My phone rang constantly with investment inquiries, partnership proposals, and media requests. The emails piled up faster than Sophia could sort them. Even Marcus Townsend, who had initially viewed my division as a pet project to humor William Morgan's pregnant granddaughter, now sought my input on broader company strategy. But amid this whirlwind of professional success, my personal life remained in limbo. Micah's attempts to serve Lionel with divorce papers had been consistently thwarted by his international movements. He had extended his Dubai assignment indefinitely, and reports from mutual acquaintances suggested he and Haley had moved in together. "We have options," Micah explained during our monthly update meeting. "We can pursue divorce by publication if he continues to evade service, but it's a longer process." I rubbed my lower back, trying to find a comfortable position in my office chair. At 8 months pregnant, everything ached. "I'm not in a rush," I replied. "The prenuptial agreement is clear. Any delays work in my favor financially." Lionel had insisted on a prenup before our wedding, concerned that my family connections might somehow disadvantage him in case of divorce. The irony wasn't lost on me that the document he'd pushed for now worked against him, with penalty clauses that increased his financial obligations the longer he avoided responding to divorce proceedings. "There's something else," Micah said, her expression carefully neutral. "Alex Reed contacted my office. He says he has information that could be relevant to your case." My jaw tightened at the mention of Lionel's childhood friend. "What kind of information?" He wouldn't say specifically, just that it concerns Lionel's finances and decision-making before he left. I considered this. Alex had tried repeatedly to reach me over the past months, but I'd ignored his messages, unwilling to engage with anyone from Lionel's inner circle. "Set up a meeting," I said finally. "But here, in my office, not your law firm." 3 days later, Alex sat across from me in Morgan Financial's executive suite, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the presence of the woman he had last seen as his best friend's quiet, non-profit working wife. "Thank you for seeing me," he began, fidgeting with his tie. "I've been trying to reach you for months." "So I've heard." I kept my tone neutral. "Micah says you have information relevant to my divorce proceedings." Alex exhaled slowly. "What I have to tell you? It doesn't paint Lionel in a good light, but I think you deserve to know." "I'm listening." "Lionel was in financial trouble before he left," Alex said, meeting my eyes directly. "He'd been day trading with borrowed money, trying to make some big score. He lost nearly everything, including funds he'd borrowed from clients at Rivera Banking. The news shouldn't have surprised me, but it did." "He was embezzling?" "Not technically. He was moving client funds temporarily to cover his positions, always replacing them before anyone noticed. Except the last time, he couldn't cover it. There was an internal audit scheduled. He needed a way out, fast. And Montgomery International offered that escape," I concluded. Alex nodded. "Haley's father sits on their board. The Dubai position was created specifically for Lionel, with understanding that the irregularities at Rivera would be quietly resolved." "So his affair with Haley wasn't just about attraction, it was calculation." The pieces were falling into place. Lionel's sudden dissatisfaction with our small life, his complaints about my unwillingness to use family connections, his desperate grab for our savings before fleeing. "In fairness," Alex added, "I think he genuinely believed you'd struggle without him. He had no idea about your family's wealth." I leaned back in my chair, one hand automatically moving to my rounded abdomen as my daughter shifted position. "Why are you telling me this now?" Alex's expression clouded. "Because he's still lying. He told me you had a breakdown when he left, that you couldn't handle being alone. When I saw that Wall Street Journal article," he shook his head, "I realized he's been manipulating everyone, including me. You deserve to know." After Alex left, I stood at my office window, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. The truth about Lionel's departure both hurt and liberated me. His abandonment hadn't been a judgment on me as a wife or partner. It had been a desperate man's attempt to escape the consequences of his own poor choices. That evening, as I prepared for bed in my penthouse, my water broke. 3 weeks before my due date. The contractions started almost immediately, powerful and insistent. "Sophia," I gasped into the phone. "I need you to call Dr. Fielding. The baby's coming." 16 hours later, I held my daughter in my arms. 5 pounds, 7 ounces of perfect determination, with a full head of dark hair and eyes that already seemed to take in everything around her. "She's beautiful," Kennedy whispered, peering over my shoulder. "What will you name her?" I studied my daughter's face, seeing in it not traces of Lionel as I had feared, but echoes of my grandfather. The same determined set of the jaw, the same focused gaze. "Morgan," I decided. "Morgan William Harrington." "Not Reed?" Kennedy asked softly. Shook my head. "No. Lionel forfeited that right when he walked away." I brushed a finger along my daughter's perfect cheek. "She's a Morgan Harrington, through and through. The name represents not just wealth or status, but responsibility, integrity, and resilience. Everything I want her to embody." As Morgan's tiny fingers wrapped around mine with surprising strength, I made a decision that would alter the course of both our lives. I would no longer be defined by Lionel's abandonment. I would no longer hide my capabilities or dim my ambitions, out of fear of appearing privileged or entitled. I would build something meaningful with the resources at my disposal. Not just for Morgan, but for all the people our investments could help. The trust fund that had matured just before Lionel's departure wasn't just money. It was opportunity, influence, and the power to effect change. I had been given these tools for a reason, and from this moment forward, I would use them without apology or hesitation. Morgan's arrival marked the true beginning of my transformation, from abandoned wife to financial powerhouse, from reluctant heiress to purposeful leader. Lionel had walked away believing he was leaving me with nothing. He could never have imagined that in doing so, he had actually given me everything I needed to become who I was always meant to be. The years following Morgan's birth passed in a blur of milestones, both personal and professional. While other new mothers might have taken extended maternity leave, I returned to Morgan Financial just 4 weeks after delivery, with a custom-designed nursery installed adjacent to my office. The arrangement raised eyebrows among the old guard of the company, but I was past caring about traditional expectations. "Your grandfather never would have allowed an infant in the executive suite," Marcus commented during a board meeting when Morgan, then 3 months old, could be heard cooing through the connecting door. "My grandfather also didn't have to breastfeed," I replied evenly, causing several male board members to shift uncomfortably in their chairs. "Times change, Marcus. Adapting to those changes is what keeps institutions relevant." By Morgan's first birthday, Morgan Humanitarian Investments had grown from a division with 12 employees to a department with over 70 professionals across 3 offices. Our innovative approach to socially responsible investing had attracted attention not just from traditional financial media, but from mainstream publications highlighting our impact on veteran housing, educational access, and medical research. The penthouse transformed alongside us. What had initially been a sanctuary from Lionel's betrayal evolved into a vibrant home reflecting both my growing confidence and Morgan's developing personality. The pristine white walls gave way to colorful murals in the nursery, educational, toys scattered across what had once been a formal living room, and framed photographs documenting our journey together. Professionally, my reputation solidified as a formidable presence in New York finance. The nickname the Iron Heiress, first used somewhat derisively in a financial blog, was soon adopted with respect throughout the industry. When I spoke at conferences or grant announcements, people listened not because of my family name, but because of the results I delivered. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings continued their slow march through legal complications. Lionel, apparently thriving in Dubai, had finally been served papers through international channels, but responded with a series of delaying tactics and procedural objections. "He's playing for time," Micah explained during our quarterly update meeting when Morgan was 18 months old. "The longer he stays abroad, the harder it is to enforce financial judgments against him." "Is he still with Haley?" I asked, surprising myself with how little emotion the question evoked. "According to our sources, no. They separated about 6 months ago. She's returned to New York to work for Montgomery's headquarters." I absorbed this information with detached interest. "And Lionel?" "Still in Dubai, though there are rumors he's struggling. Montgomery International has undergone restructuring, and several expatriate positions have been eliminated." I nodded, returning to the legal documents before us. Lionel's circumstances no longer affected my daily life or decisions. He had become a distant figure, relevant only in legal terms, not emotional ones. On Morgan's second birthday, I hosted a small celebration at the penthouse. Kennedy was there, of course, along with Doug Winters, Sophia and her husband, and a few colleagues who had become friends. Morgan toddled around in a tiny party dress, her dark curls bouncing with each determined step, charming everyone with her precocious vocabulary and fearless curiosity. "She's exactly like you," Doug observed, watching Morgan methodically organize her new blocks by color before building an impressively stable tower. "William would have adored her." "I think she has more patience than I do," I laughed, as Morgan carefully placed another block on her creation. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and Morgan was asleep, Kennedy and I shared a bottle of wine on the penthouse terrace, the city lights glittering below us like earthbound stars. "If someone had told you 3 years ago that this would be your life," Kennedy mused, "what would you have said?" I considered the question, swirling the wine in my glass. I'd have said they were insane. Running a major investment division, living in a Park Avenue penthouse, raising a child on my own? None of it was in my plans. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" The question gave me pause. Did I regret the path that had led me here? The betrayal, the abandonment, the revelation of Lionel's true character? "No," I said finally, the certainty in my voice surprising even me. "I regret the pain, of course, but not the outcome. If Lionel hadn't left, I'd still be hiding my potential, pretending to be someone I'm not. I'd still be burying my talents, out of some misguided idea that using my family's resources made me less authentic." Kennedy studied me over the rim of her glass. "You're happier now than you ever were with him." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "I am. Not despite being a single mother running a financial empire, but because of it. I'm finally living truthfully." The next day, I made another decision that would further cement my transformation. During the morning executive meeting, I proposed a restructuring of Morgan Financial's leadership. Marcus has indicated his desire to step down as CEO within the next year, I explained to the board. I believe it's time we discuss succession planning. Several board members exchanged glances, clearly anticipating my next words. "I would like to formally announce my candidacy for the position," I continued. "Over the past 2 years, Morgan Humanitarian Investments has consistently outperformed traditional divisions in both returns and growth metrics. I've demonstrated my capacity for innovation and leadership under challenging circumstances." Marcus's expression remained carefully neutral, though the slight tightening around his eyes betrayed his discomfort. "The CEO position has traditionally required extensive experience in traditional banking operations." "Traditions evolve," I replied calmly. "The financial landscape is changing. Social impact investing is the future, not a niche concern. Morgan Financial should be leading that evolution, not reacting to it." The boardroom fell silent as the members considered my proposal. Finally, Judith Blackwell, the CFO who had once questioned my qualifications, spoke up. I move that we establish a formal succession committee to evaluate Ms. Morgan Harrington's candidacy, alongside any other qualified internal candidates. The motion passed unanimously. As I left the boardroom, that day, I felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with ambition or power for its own sake. This was about building something meaningful from the foundation my grandfather had established, something that would endure not just for Morgan, but for all those impacted by our investments. Lionel had walked away believing he was escaping a small life with a woman of limited vision. In doing so, he had inadvertently freed me to build something far greater than either of us could have imagined. The weeks following my announcement to pursue the CEO position brought both expected and unexpected challenges. The succession committee formed quickly, outlining a rigorous 6-month evaluation process for all candidates. My primary competition emerged in the form of Peter Davenport, head of Morgan Financial's traditional investment banking division and a 20-year veteran of the company. "It's nothing personal," he assured me during a chance encounter in the executive elevator. "I respect what you've built with humanitarian investments, but Morgan Financial needs steady, experienced leadership." The implication hung unspoken between us, that my 3 years at the company, however successful, couldn't match his decades of institutional knowledge, that my humanitarian focus somehow made me less qualified to lead a profit-driven enterprise. Rather than taking offense, I saw an opportunity. "I've been thinking the same thing, Peter. Experience matters. That's why I'd like to propose a series of executive shadowing sessions, you spending time in my division, me in yours. We should both understand the entirety of what we might lead." He blinked, clearly caught off guard by my response. "That's actually quite reasonable. I'll have Sophia set it up," I replied as the elevator doors opened. After all, regardless of who becomes CEO, we'll need to work together. This approach, turning potential adversaries into allies, became my strategy throughout the evaluation process. Instead of positioning myself in opposition to the old guard, I demonstrated how my vision could enhance rather than replace their expertise. Meanwhile, Morgan, now nearly 3, was developing her own determined personality. Her preschool teachers reported that she organized the other children during play, assigning roles with the authority of a tiny CEO. "She's a natural leader," her primary teacher told me during a parent conference. "But she also shows remarkable empathy." Yesterday, when Tyler was upset about his artwork, Morgan stopped what she was doing to comfort him and then helped him fix his painting. Pride swelled in my chest at these reports. Despite the demands of my career and the absence of a father, Morgan was thriving, secure in my love, confident in her abilities, and developing the emotional intelligence that would serve her throughout. My personal evolution continued alongside Morgan's growth. The woman who had once hesitated to claim her birthright now moved through the world with purposeful confidence. Regular features in business publications highlighted not just Morgan Humanitarian Investments' financial success, but its tangible impact: veterans housed, scholarships funded, medical research advanced. The Iron Heiress nickname evolved into something more nuanced. A profile in Forbes described me as the compassionate capitalist, proving that profit and purpose aren't mutually exclusive. The article included a photograph of Morgan and me in my office, my daughter coloring contentedly at a small desk beside mine, while I reviewed investment proposals. This carefully cultivated image of successful single motherhood and corporate leadership wasn't without its costs, however. Late nights reviewing documents after Morgan was asleep. Early mornings preparing presentations before she woke. The constant, mental balancing act of being fully present for both my child and my career left little time for anything resembling a personal life. Kennedy, now engaged to a sculptor she'd met through her gallery work, regularly encouraged me to get back out there. "You haven't been on a date in 3 years," she pointed out during one of our weekly dinners. "Not everyone is Lionel." "I'm aware," I replied dryly. But between Morgan and the CEO evaluation, I hardly have time to breathe, let alone date. Truth was more complicated than simple busyness, though. Lionel's betrayal had left wounds that, while no longer raw, had nevertheless changed how I viewed relationships. Trust, once given freely, now seemed a precious commodity I was hesitant to invest. The CEO evaluation process intensified these pressures. Each candidate underwent a series of challenges designed to test our strategic thinking, leadership abilities, financial acumen, and crisis management skills. Board members observed our performance in simulated scenarios, while consultants conducted extensive interviews with our colleagues and subordinates. During one particularly grueling simulation involving a hypothetical market crash, I noticed Marcus watching me with unusual intensity. "You're different than I expected," he said afterward as we gathered our materials. "Different? How?" I asked, maintaining my professional composure despite my exhaustion. "When you first appeared in the boardroom 3 years ago, pregnant and proposing a humanitarian division, I thought you were just playing at business. A bored socialite with a trust fund trying to find meaning." I raised an eyebrow. "And now?" "Now I see William in you." He adjusted his glasses, a rare gesture of discomfort from the usually composed interim CEO. The same strategic mind, the same ability to see opportunities others miss. But with something he lacked, a genuine concern for the impact of our decisions beyond the balance sheet. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from Sophia. "Call immediately. Issue with Morgan at preschool." My heart raced as I dialed, all thoughts of the CEO position instantly forgotten. Morgan had fallen during outdoor play, Sophia explained, and the school nurse suspected a broken arm. I hurried to the elevator, Marcus following me with concern. "Family emergency," I explained tersely. "Morgan's been injured at school." "Go," he said immediately. "We'll reschedule the afternoon sessions." At the hospital, X-rays confirmed a clean break in Morgan's left forearm. She sat stoically as the doctor explained the casting process, her dark eyes serious but dry. "Does it hurt terribly?" I asked, brushing her curls from her forehead. "It did," she replied matter-of-factly. "But I used my brave breathing like you taught me." As the orthopedist applied the cast, pink at Morgan's insistence, I received another call, this time from Micah. "I think you should know," she said when I stepped into the hallway. "Lionel Reed has returned to New York." The news landed like a physical blow. 5 years after walking out, 3 years after Morgan's birth, Lionel had suddenly reappeared, just as I stood on the threshold of assuming leadership of my family's company. Coincidence? Or calculated timing? With Lionel, I had learned nothing happened without calculation. "Has he made contact?" I asked, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. "Not directly," Micah replied. "But he's taken a position with Eldridge Capital. They're one of Montgomery International's major competitors." I see. And I did see, with perfect clarity. Lionel had returned not for Morgan or me, but for the next opportunity, the next stepping stone in his career. "Do you want me to prepare for potential custody issues?" Micah asked. I glanced through the door at my daughter, brave and composed as the doctor finished her cast. "No," I said firmly. "He abandoned her before she was born. He's made no attempt at contact in 3 years. If he wants access now, he'll have to go through me." When I returned to Morgan's side, she looked up with those penetrating eyes that sometimes seemed to see straight through adult pretenses. "Everything okay, Mommy?" I smiled, pushing thoughts of Lionel aside. "Everything's perfect, sweetheart. You're being so brave." Later that evening, as Morgan slept in her bedroom, the cast already decorated with drawings from Kennedy and Sophia, I stood on the penthouse terrace, contemplating Lionel's return and what it might mean for us. Not us as a family. That possibility had died the moment he walked out. but us as mother and daughter, as Morgan Harringtons building a legacy of purpose and impact. The city lights glittered below, a reminder of how far I'd come from that Valentine's Day dinner and the life I thought I wanted. Whatever Lionel's reasons for returning, I was no longer the woman he had abandoned. And Morgan had never been, would never be, the child he had rejected. We were something else entirely now. Something stronger, something built not despite abandonment but because of it. Something he could never touch. Congratulations, Ms. Morgan Harrington. The board chair extended his hand across the polished conference table. The succession committee's decision was unanimous. You will be the next CEO of Morgan Financial Group. 6 months of rigorous evaluation had culminated in this moment. At 35, I had become one of the youngest CEOs in the financial industry and the first woman to lead Morgan Financial in its 80-year history. Peter Davenport was the first to congratulate me after the announcement, his handshake firm and genuine. Our executive shadowing sessions had evolved into mutual respect, and he would be a valuable ally in the transition. Your grandfather would be proud, Marcus said as he prepared to clear out his office. You've earned this, Sherry. Not because of your name, but despite it. The news of my appointment made headlines across financial media. Morgan Harrington to lead family empire, announced the Wall Street Journal. The Iron Heiress ascends, declared Financial Times. The business world buzzed with speculation about how my leadership would transform one of the oldest financial institutions in New York. Morgan, now 5 and starting kindergarten, understood the significance in her own way. Does this mean you're the boss of everyone now? She asked over breakfast the morning after the announcement. At the company, yes, I replied, adjusting her school uniform. But you're still the boss at home. She considered this seriously, then nodded. That seems fair. The night before my official installation as CEO, I found myself unable to sleep. I stepped onto the terrace, the city spread before me like a carpet of stars. 7 years had passed since that Valentine's Day when Lionel walked out, leaving me pregnant and seemingly alone. 7 years of transformation, challenge, and growth. In that time, I had evolved from a woman who hid her capabilities to one who wielded them purposefully. From someone who feared embracing her birthright to someone who recognized it as a platform for meaningful change. From an abandoned wife to one of the most powerful women in finance. The divorce had finally been settled 3 months earlier, after years of legal maneuvering. Lionel had eventually conceded to all terms, his position at Eldridge Capital apparently requiring resolution of his personal affairs. He had made no attempt to contact Morgan, a fact that stung for her sake but simplified our lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Kennedy. Sleep well, CEO. Tomorrow you make history. I smiled, typing back. History was never the goal, just a better future. And that remained true. As I prepared to take control of Morgan Financial Group, my vision extended far beyond profit margins and market share. I planned to expand the humanitarian investment model across all divisions, proving that compassionate capitalism could transform not just one company, but an industry. Morgan Financial would become a force for positive change under my leadership, funding affordable housing developments, supporting medical research in neglected fields, providing microloans to underserved entrepreneurs, and investing in renewable energy innovations. The little girl sleeping peacefully in her bedroom, the child Lionel had rejected before even meeting her, would inherit not just wealth, but a legacy of purpose. She would grow up understanding that privilege carries responsibility, that true success is measured by impact as well as profit. As dawn broke over the Manhattan skyline, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with achievement or accolades. The circle that began with betrayal and abandonment had transformed into something powerful and purposeful. The trust fund that I had once hidden out of misplaced principle had become the foundation for meaningful change. Sometimes, life's greatest gifts arrive disguised as its cruelest blows. Lionel's abandonment, intended to diminish me, had instead catalyzed my expansion. The trust fund, hidden during my marriage, had empowered me when I needed it most. The universe, it seemed, had plans that far exceeded my own modest expectations. And I was finally ready to embrace them fully. The economic downturn hit without warning. What began as sector-specific turbulence in technology stocks quickly spread across markets like wildfire. Wall Street firms panicked, with several major institutions announcing layoffs and emergency restructuring plans. 3 years into my tenure as CEO of Morgan Financial Group, this was my first major crisis, the true test of my leadership. The board watched nervously as our stock price dipped along with the broader market, wondering if their humanitarian CEO had the stomach for tough decisions. Most firms are cutting 20% of their workforce, Peter advised during our emergency executive meeting. We should consider similar measures to reassure shareholders. Layoffs are a short-term solution that creates long-term problems, I countered, looking around the table at my executive team. Morgan Financial didn't survive the Great Depression and every recession since by abandoning our people at the first sign of trouble. Instead of following the industry pattern of panic and cuts, I proposed a different approach. A temporary executive pay reduction, starting with me, and redeployment of resources to sectors showing resilience. We would maintain our workforce while shifting focus toward recession-resistant investments. This is unorthodox, Marcus, who had remained on the board after retiring as CEO, observed. The market expects blood. The market has short-term memory, I replied. But our employees and clients don't. How we behave in crisis defines us far more than how we act in prosperity. My strategy faced significant pushback, particularly from older board members who had weathered previous downturns with traditional cost-cutting measures. For the first time since becoming CEO, I had to fully leverage my controlling interest to override objections. I understand your concerns, I told the dissenting voices. But Morgan Financial isn't just another financial institution. We're building something different, banking with both purpose and profit. That vision doesn't get shelved when markets turn volatile. As Wall Street hemorrhaged jobs, Morgan Financial remained intact. We reallocated teams to focus on counter-cyclical opportunities, particularly in affordable housing and essential services. These sectors, core to our humanitarian investment strategy, proved remarkably stable amidst broader market chaos. 6 months into the downturn, our approach began bearing fruit. While competitors struggled with brain drain and low morale following their layoffs, our intact workforce developed new products specifically designed for the economic climate. Our stock price stabilized and then began a steady recovery, outperforming industry averages. Financial media, initially critical of my soft approach, began publishing analyses of the Morgan method for navigating downturns. Harvard Business School developed a case study on our crisis management strategy. You took a significant risk, Doug observed during dinner at my penthouse as we celebrated Morgan Financial's resilience. The board could have ousted you if things had gone badly. It wasn't a risk, I corrected him. It was a return to fundamentals. My grandfather always said that financial institutions exist to stabilize, not amplify economic volatility. Through this crisis, Morgan, now 8, observed her mother's leadership with keen interest. I had made a point of explaining the situation to her in age-appropriate terms, believing that understanding economic cycles was as important to her education as mathematics or literature. Why are the other banks firing people when they need money? She asked one evening as I reviewed quarterly reports at the dining table. Because they're thinking about the next 3 months, not the next 3 years, I explained. She considered this with the serious expression that reminded me so much of my grandfather. That's short-sighted, she pronounced, using a term she'd clearly picked up from overhearing my work conversations. Yes, it is, I agreed, impressed by her perception. The true validation came not from press coverage or stock performance, but from a quiet moment during our annual employee appreciation event. A senior investment manager approached me, visibly emotional. "Thank you for fighting for us," he said simply. "My sister works at Cumberland Bank. They cut her entire department despite 15 years of service. She's still looking for work 6 months later." In that moment, I understood what my grandfather had meant about wealth being a tool. The trust fund that had once seemed like a guilty secret had enabled me to make decisions based on values rather than fear during a crisis. I had protected hundreds of families from the trauma I had once faced, the sudden loss of financial security, the ground disappearing beneath one's feet. Lionel's abandonment had taught me how quickly stability could vanish. That lesson, painful as it had been, now informed leadership that sheltered others from similar experiences. The crisis had been a crucible, testing both my resolve and my vision. We had emerged stronger, our model validated not just financially, but ethically. As markets gradually recovered, Morgan Financial stood apart, a firm that had proven its principles weren't just marketing talking points, but operational philosophy. I had faced the major test of my leadership, and passed it not by abandoning my values, but by doubling down on them. On Morgan's 10th birthday, we celebrated not just her first decade, but a significant milestone for Morgan Financial Group. Under my leadership, the company had transformed from a traditional banking institution into a pioneering force in impact investing, with our humanitarian division now representing over 40% of our total portfolio. The exclusive birthday celebration at our Hamptons Beach House gathered Morgan's friends from her private school, alongside our close circle of adults, Kennedy, and her husband, Doug, Sophia, and her family, and a few trusted colleagues who had become friends over the years. As children played on the beach under the watchful eyes of professional childcare staff, the adults gathered on the sprawling deck, overlooking the Atlantic. The spring sun warmed the afternoon as champagne flowed, and conversation drifted between personal updates and industry gossip. "The acquisition of Westwood Partners is finalized," Peter announced, raising his glass. "The Morgan humanitarian model is officially going global. This expansion, acquiring a European investment firm known for its environmental focus, represented the fulfillment of a vision I'd articulated when first assuming the CEO position. We were now positioned to implement our approach to compassionate capitalism across international markets." "To Sherry," Doug toasted, "who proved that making money and making a difference aren't mutually exclusive." As my colleagues raised their glasses, I caught sight of Morgan on the beach below. Tall for her age, with my dark hair and determination, but her own distinctive features, she was organizing her friends into what appeared to be an elaborate sandcastle. Competition, complete with judging criteria she was outlining on a notepad. My daughter had developed into a remarkable child, academically gifted, socially conscious, and possessed of natural leadership abilities that sometimes left her teachers struggling to keep pace. Unlike many children of privilege, she understood the value of her position and the responsibilities it entailed. "She's going to run Morgan Financial someday, isn't she?" Kennedy observed, following my gaze. "If she chooses to," I replied, though privately I suspected Kennedy was right. Morgan had already shown unmistakable interest in the family business, regularly asking to visit my office and absorbing financial concepts with remarkable ease. The past decade had transformed not just my professional status, but my personal identity. The abandoned wife had become a globally recognized business leader. The woman who had once hidden her wealth out of misplaced principle now wielded it purposefully, driving change across multiple industries through strategic investment. Financial. Times had recently named me one of the 50 most influential women in global finance. Forbes had featured our family on its cover with the headline, "The Future of Wealth: How the Morgan Harringtons Are Redefining Success." The Metropolitan Museum had named its newly renovated East Wing after our family in recognition of our arts education endowment. These external validations meant less to me than the tangible impact of our work. Affordable housing developments. In 10 major cities, medical research breakthroughs our funding had supported, educational initiatives that had changed thousands of lives, and environmental projects that were measurably reducing carbon emissions. Most meaningful of all was the culture we had created at Morgan Financial, one that valued both performance and purpose, that rewarded innovation and integrity equally. Our turnover rate was the lowest in the industry. Our recruitment efforts attracted top talent specifically drawn to our mission-driven approach. As sunset painted the sky in brilliant orange and pink, I gathered Morgan's friends for the cake ceremony. My daughter stood proudly beside her three-tiered creation, designed by a celebrity pastry chef but decorated according to Morgan's precise specifications, with mathematical symbols and financial icons rendered in fondant. "Make a wish," I whispered, as she prepared to blow out the candles. She looked up at me, her expression suddenly serious beyond her years. "I don't need to," she replied. "We already have everything important." In that moment, watching my daughter surrounded by friends, secure in her place in the world, I felt a wave of gratitude for the journey that had brought us here. The pain of Lionel's betrayal had faded to a distant memory, relevant only as the catalyst for everything we had built. The trust fund that had matured just before he walked away had become not just financial security, but a force for transformation of ourselves, our company, and countless lives touched by our investments. What had once been a secret, kept out, of principle had become a legacy defined by purpose. We had not just survived abandonment. We had alchemized it into achievement that extended far beyond material success. We had created meaning from betrayal, purpose from pain, and in doing so, we had realized something greater than either of us could have imagined on that Valentine's Day 10 years before. The email arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Sophia had flagged it with a priority marker, something she rarely did with my personal correspondence. The subject line was simple: Meeting request, Lionel Reed. 10 years and 3 months had passed since Lionel walked out of our apartment and our lives. 10 years of building, growing, and transforming both Morgan Financial and ourselves. 10 years during which he had made no attempt to contact his daughter or acknowledge her existence. Now, suddenly, he wanted a meeting. I stared at the email, my finger hovering over the delete button. The divorce had been finalized years ago. There were no legal loose ends, no remaining connections that required communication. I owed him nothing. And yet, curiosity flickered. What could possibly motivate this outreach after a decade of silence? "Sophia." I called through the intercom. "Can you come in, please?" She appeared immediately, efficient as always. "Yes, Ms. Morgan Harrington." What do we know about Lionel Reed's current situation? Her expression remained professionally neutral, though we both knew this was far from a routine inquiry. "Mr. Reed is no longer with Eldridge Capital. According to our industry contacts, they underwent restructuring 6 months ago, and his position was eliminated. There are rumors he's been consulting independently, but struggling to secure permanent placement." I nodded, processing this information. "And the meeting request? Did he provide any details about its purpose?" "Only that it concerns a matter of mutual interest, and that he would appreciate discretion." Of course he would. Discretion had always been Lionel's preference when his actions might reflect poorly on him. "Thank you, Sophia. I'll let you know my decision." After she left, I swiveled my chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. The Manhattan skyline spread. Before me, a concrete testament to ambition, struggle, and achievement. Somewhere in that urban landscape was Lionel Reed, once my husband, the man who had walked away from his pregnant wife without a backward glance. What did he want? Money seemed the most likely motivation. If his career had stalled, he might be desperate enough to approach the woman whose accounts he had once emptied. My phone buzzed with a text from Morgan's school. She had won first place in the regional mathematics championship. Pride swelled as I typed a quick congratulatory response, promising a celebration dinner at her favorite restaurant, Morgan. My brilliant, determined daughter who had never known her father, who had never needed to know him, who carried my family. Name, not his. Who was thriving in every measurable way. Would meeting with Lionel somehow disrupt the carefully constructed life we had built? Or would refusing to meet leave an unexamined question mark in our story? I thought of my grandfather's advice about confronting difficult situations. Face them directly, Sherry. Unaddressed issues don't disappear. They fester. Decision made, I drafted a brief response. Mr. Reed, I will meet with you this Friday at 3 p.m. at Morgan Financial Group headquarters. Please arrive promptly and check in with security in the main lobby. Sherry Morgan Harrington, CEO, Morgan Financial Group professional. Detached, on my territory and my terms. When Friday arrived, I arranged my schedule to ensure the meeting wouldn't disrupt my evening plans with Morgan. I wore the same suit I'd worn for my Forbes cover shoot, a subtle power move that wasn't lost on Sophia, who raised an eyebrow as she confirmed Lionel had arrived and was being escorted up. "Would you like me to stay for the meeting?" she asked, her protective instinct evident. "That won't be necessary," I replied, "but please interrupt after 20 minutes with an urgent call." When the office door opened, the man who entered was both familiar and a stranger. Lionel's once immaculate appearance had faded. His designer suit looked well worn, his once confident posture slightly diminished. The past decade had etched lines around his eyes and mouth that spoke of stress rather than laughter. "Sherry," he began, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty I'd never heard before. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Ms. Morgan Harrington," I corrected him calmly, not offering to shake his hand. "Please sit and explain the purpose of this meeting." He took the seat across from my desk, his eyes taking in the evidence of my success. The awards displayed on the credenza, the framed magazine covers, the sweeping view from the CEO's office. "You've done well for yourself," he observed, an uncomfortable smile forming. "The rumors about your success weren't exaggerated." "I didn't agree to meet for small talk or validation of industry rumors, Mr. Reed. What is this about?" His smile faltered. "Right, of course." He straightened in his chair. "I've been going through some professional transitions recently. The financial sector has changed considerably since I left for Dubai." "Indeed." I kept my expression neutral. "Markets evolve. Adaptability is essential." A flash of irritation crossed his face. He had always disliked being lectured on professional matters, but he quickly suppressed it. "The reason I wanted to meet is, well, it's about Morgan." The mention of my daughter's name in his mouth sent a chill through me. "You lost any right to discuss my daughter when you questioned her paternity and abandoned her before birth." "No," he said quickly. "I know I have no legal standing, but I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately about choices I made, mistakes, regrets." He paused, seemingly gathering courage. "I'd like the opportunity to meet her. Just once." The audacity was breathtaking. After 10 years of complete absence, he wanted to casually step into Morgan's life. Not because he had suddenly developed paternal instincts, but because his career had faltered and he was reflecting on past choices. "No." The word was quiet, but absolute. "I understand your hesitation." He pressed on. "But surely she must have questions about her father. Children need—" "Morgan has everything she needs," I interrupted, my voice remaining measured despite the anger building inside. "Me. She's not missing anything, least of all a father who chose to walk away." "People change, Sherry," he said, leaning forward. "I've changed. Perhaps. But parenthood isn't about what you need or want, Lionel. It's about what's best for the child. And what's best for Morgan is consistency and stability. not the sudden appearance of a stranger claiming biological connection. Before he could respond, my intercom buzzed. "Ms. Morgan Harrington, your urgent call is waiting." Sophia's voice announced precisely 20 minutes into our meeting, just as arranged. I stood, indicating our time was concluded. "I wish you well in your professional transitions, Mr. Reed, but Morgan and I are not part of your redemption narrative." As security escorted him out, I watched from my office window as Lionel emerged onto the street below, looking diminished against the towering Morgan Financial building. The man who had once dominated my world now appeared small, not just physically distant, but fundamentally irrelevant to the life we had built without him. That evening, as Morgan enthusiastically described her mathematics victory over dinner, I studied her animated features, her intelligence, her confidence, her sense of self. None of these qualities had required Lionel's presence to develop. None of our happiness had depended on his return. The trust fund that had matured just before he left had given us not just financial security, but freedom. Freedom from needing anything from a man who had proven himself unworthy of our consideration. Past had returned, only to reveal how completely we had transcended it. 1 month after Lionel's unexpected appearance, Morgan surprised me with a question during our Sunday morning ritual of making Belgian waffles together. "Mom, do I have a father?" The mixing bowl nearly slipped from my hands. At 10, Morgan was observant and precocious, noticing details most children overlooked. She had undoubtedly recognized that unlike her classmates, she never mentioned a father, had no photographs of one, celebrated no Father's Day. "Everyone has a biological father," I answered carefully, setting down the whisk. "But not everyone has a father who is part of their life." She nodded thoughtfully, measuring vanilla extract with scientific precision. "Is mine alive?" "Yes." "Does he know about me?" I took a deep breath, weighing honesty against protection. I had always promised myself I would never lie to my daughter, even when the truth was complicated. "He's always known about you. He chose not to be involved in our lives." Morgan absorbed this information with remarkable composure. "Was it because of something I did?" "No," I said firmly, turning her to face me. "It was never, ever about you. Your father made his decision before you were born, based entirely on his own issues and character. You were perfect then, and you're perfect now." She considered this, her analytical mind visibly processing. "Is that why I'm a Morgan Harrington instead of having his name?" "Yes. The Morgan Harrington name represents values I wanted for you: integrity, responsibility, purpose. It's not just a name. It's a legacy you're already building upon in your own way." To my surprise, Morgan nodded with apparent satisfaction. "That makes sense. Names should mean something." She returned to the waffle batter. "What was his name?" "Lionel Reed." She tested the name silently, her lips forming the syllables. "Did you love him?" "I did once," I admitted. "But love isn't always enough to make someone stay, or to make them worthy of staying in your life." "Like in business," she observed, drawing a parallel to concepts she understood. "Sometimes you have to end partnerships that aren't working, even if they started well." I smiled at her characteristic ability to frame emotional concepts in pragmatic terms. "That's a good way to think about it." As we continued cooking, Morgan asked a few more questions, factual rather than emotional. "What did Lionel do for work? Where was he from? Did I have photos of him?" I answered honestly but briefly, emphasizing that his absence was his choice, never a reflection on her worth. Later that afternoon, as we walked through Central Park, Morgan returned to the subject. "I've been thinking about fathers," she said, kicking autumn leaves along the path. "They're supposed to teach you things and protect you, right?" "Traditionally, yes. But you've taught me everything important. And Doug helps with guy stuff when I need it. And Peter shows me finance things that aren't your specialty." She ticked off male figures in her life on her fingers. Kennedy's husband teaches me about art. So technically, I have lots of fathers. Just not one specific one. The wisdom in her observation caught me off guard. That's remarkably insightful, Morgan. Plus, she continued pragmatically, if he'd stayed, you might not be CEO. You might still be at the Veterans Place, and we wouldn't have helped all those people with the housing projects and scholarships. I stopped walking, struck by the truth in her assessment. She was right. If Lionel hadn't left, I might never have claimed my birthright, might never have transformed Morgan Financial, might never have discovered my capacity for leadership that extended far beyond what I'd imagined possible. His betrayal, intended to diminish me, had instead catalyzed my expansion. The abandonment that should have broken me had instead revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. Are you sad about not having a regular father? I asked. Morgan shrugged. Sometimes I'm curious, but I'm not sad. We have a good life. The simplicity of her response contained profound wisdom. We did have a good life, not despite being abandoned, but in many ways because of it. The path forced upon us had led to destinations far more meaningful than our original route would. Eva allowed. That evening, watching Morgan complete her mathematics homework with characteristic focus, I reflected on the decade since Lionel walked out. The trust fund that had matured just before his departure had been the seed from which we had grown something remarkable, not just financial success, but a purposeful legacy that touched countless lives through our investments and philanthropy. What had begun as personal betrayal had transformed into far-reaching positive impact. The very absence Lionel had created had made space for something greater than his presence would have permitted. Sometimes life's most painful moments are merely the beginning of its most meaningful gifts. When Morgan turned 12, I established a small foundation in her name, with a modest initial endowment of $5 million. The Morgan William Harrington Foundation would focus specifically on supporting children from single-parent households, funding educational opportunities, enrichment programs, and practical support services. This is yours to direct, I explained, as we reviewed the foundation documents together. You'll have advisors, of course, but the vision and focus will be entirely yours to shape. Morgan studied the paperwork with the serious concentration that characterized her approach to everything meaningful. So I get to decide which projects we fund? Within the mission parameters, yes. My only requirement is that you meet personally, with grant recipients at least once a year. Numbers on paper should always connect to real people in the world. On the day we officially launched the foundation with a small ceremony at Morgan Financial headquarters, I watched my daughter address the gathered press and community partners with poise that belied her age. She spoke clearly about her vision for supporting children like herself, not with pity, but with practical resources that expanded their opportunities. Single-parent families aren't incomplete or damaged, she stated firmly into the microphone. They're just differently structured. Our foundation will help ensure that different never means disadvantaged. Pride swelled in my chest as she fielded questions with thoughtful, articulate responses. This remarkable young woman, once the tiny life I had feared I couldn't protect after Lionel's abandonment, was already becoming a force for positive change, in her own right. The day after the foundation launch, an envelope arrived at our penthouse. Inside was a newspaper clipping about the foundation's establishment and a brief handwritten note. She is extraordinary. You've done what I never could. Have. Thank you for that. LRI studied Lionel's familiar handwriting, feeling neither anger nor vindication, just a quiet acknowledgement of truth. He was right. Morgan was extraordinary. And perhaps I had accomplished something he couldn't have, not because he lacked capability, but because his absence had forced me to draw upon strengths I might otherwise never have discovered. I didn't respond to his note. There was nothing to say. The life we had created spoke for itself. In the years that followed, Morgan continued to develop into her own person, excelling academically, expanding her foundation's impact, and gradually showing increasing interest in the inner workings of Morgan Financial Group. By 15, she was sitting in on board meetings as an observer. By 16, she was proposing investment strategies that senior advisors implemented with impressive results. "Do you feel pressure to follow in my footsteps?" I asked her once, concerned that my path might be overshadowing her own dreams. "No," she replied thoughtfully. "I'm not following in your footsteps. I'm walking alongside them, learning from them, but creating my own path. Besides," she added with a smile that illuminated her entire face, "I have bigger plans." As I watched my daughter grow into her potential, confident, purposeful, and unencumbered by the abandonment that might have defined her, I recognized that Lionel's departure, painful as it had ultimately been a gift. Not because absence was better than presence, but because his specific absence had created space for something more authentic to emerge. The trust fund that had matured just before he left hadn't just provided financial security. It had funded freedom. Freedom to build lives aligned with our true values rather than compromised by someone else's limitations. What had begun as betrayal had blossomed into blessing. What had seemed like an ending had become a beginning, and the path forward stretched before us, limitless with possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.